can quickly outline our plan. Does that sound good? And then we can maybe wait a couple moments for people to show up in full strength and then get started. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So what we're thinking of doing is kind of dividing the session, which is going to be 2 hours, as Tori mentioned, into 2 parts. The first part, what we're thinking of doing is Tori plays a standard time control training game, 15 plus 10. So, serious, allowing time to concentrate and think. We both mute our mics to each other, so neither of us hears the other person. And we both commentate. So Tori commentates as she's playing. I'm commentating on the game, observing, pointing out good things, bad things, kind of critiquing. And then we convene after the game is finished. Then we both hear each other and we discuss the game. I point out my thoughts, Tori points out her thoughts. And we do that for 2 games. That should take about an hour, give or take. And then after that, we will transition to some opening study. So I'll be showing some openings, talking about some general principles, and hopefully we'll get some cool stuff going there. And that might take, again, another hour, give or take. And we're more than down to somewhat improvise if the crowd desires something else, or something's going particularly well.
Yeah. So I'm hyped too. I'm really excited.
Mm-hmm.
So hi Perpetual. I know this is really cool. But
yeah, we're hoping that this will be the beginning, the humble beginnings of a tradition.
Yeah, and this one was kind of planned like last minute, like within like the last week, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe less than a week. So I think there's more like next month or whatever. I think we'll have more exciting stuff, or more clean cut.
Yeah.
More promotion stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I'm hoping you guys, the layout's okay. I tried to fit in the beautiful graphic, but if anything is bothering you, let me know. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah. I did reach 1300 actually a couple weeks ago.
Oh, fantastic!
I did the PCL Summer Series, and I got paired up with like 1600.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Like the last time I played Rapid, it was like 2 weeks ago.
Perfect.
Oh, Hammer! Thank you so much for raiding with a party of 146.
Wow.
It's the exciting stream today. Thank you so much for raid. We are doing lessons. This is the first of like hopefully a good series. But hi Joe Brune. But yep, we were just kind of talking about the format and plan for today.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome everyone.
Yeah. So those of you just trickling in, we'll start with 2 training games that Tori plays, and I'll be commentating on them, and then we convene after the game and discuss it. In my experience, I think it's very interesting because it affords kind of you the opportunity to play and to have fun, and we get kind of the best of every world. I think there's nothing like, I can talk about stuff, but playing is really the meat of training, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know how much of my chess you've actually watched before, so you'll probably, I don't know, it's probably stuff you...
Well, I watched your match against Magnus, and I mean, your win against Fabiano in the U.S. Championship a couple months ago was riveting.
I know, it was
but
pretty good.
I was glued to my seat. No, but I've seen your games. I saw that smothered mate, that nasty smothered mate you gave.
Yeah.
I think it was a couple days ago. Maybe a couple months ago.
It happened a couple months ago, but it was like my proudest game ever.
Mm-hmm. It's actually not easy to do that. I can probably count on one finger the amount of smothered mates I've delivered in a real game, even online.
So hi Omid. But yeah, whenever you want to start the games or whatever.
Yeah, I'm thinking we can. What do you think? I think we can jump in.
Yeah. So.
So yeah, just a reminder that we're gonna mute each other's mic to each other, so I won't hear Tori, Tori won't hear me, and you're welcome to watch both of us and observe our own takes on the game that's being played.
We are in squad stream too, so you can easily switch between streams.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it should be pretty cool. So, are you following me right now?
I should. Yeah, I should do that.
You.
Follow.
Hey Ben.
Okay. Now I'm following you.
Okay. I will start my game now, and I will mute myself.
Likewise. All right.
Okay.
So I just muted myself. To Tori. Tori can't hear me. And Tori has started her game. She's playing white against Mr. Al Sheikh 4. Hoping that you guys can see everything fine. And e4, e5 has been played. First mistake. Knight f3. Okay, so this is of course standard knight c6. Let's see what opening Tori chooses. I mean, I think most people who are starting to play usually play the Italian, which is kind of the rite of passage opening. But you know, Rai Lopez, Scotch. There's a lot of good openings here. Tori's probably thinking about which line to choose. She's playing perfectly so far. Basic knight c3, the 4 knights, also perfectly viable opening choice. So this is completely lost. Oh, bishop c5. So Tori can resign here. She's already made 3 mistakes out of 3 moves. I have no more interest in comment. The rest is easy. Just kidding. So bishop c5 is an interesting move. I mean, of course, as you guys probably know, knight f6 here is the main move leading into the 4 knights. What is the drawback of bishop c5? The drawback is that white now has the move knight takes c5. The point being, after knight takes c5, there's d4. Tori decides to play bishop c4, which is also, of course, completely fine. Now knight f6 transposes back into the 4 knights. And we'll see what Al Sheikh plays. I mean, knight f6, yeah, that's kind of an old line where both sides develop symmetrically. And, you know, I can also play some music, by the way. What's up, Sepper? I don't know if people... But this is a more instructive stream, so hopefully, you know, you won't get bored. So knight f6 indeed has been played. What is the idea here for white now? White needs to complete her development as fast as possible. And there are 2 ways to do this. She can castle, or she can play d3, opening up the bishop and develop the bishop to g5. Knight takes c5 now does not work, because after knight takes c5, the bishop on c4 will be hanging. Does the 4 knights usually lead to a draw? No, I wouldn't say that it's a drawish opening necessarily. There are a couple of drawish lines in the 4 knights that I might show afterwards, but I wouldn't say that it by nature leads to drawish position. So Tori, in fact, plays d3. She's playing perfectly so far. The opening stage, she's got down h6. What is the idea? To stop the bishop. Well, that's not the idea. To stop the bishop from developing to g5. Very sensible move. So where does this bishop go? The bishop goes usually to square e3 here. Now, you might be saying, well, what does that do? Because black's going to double the pawns by taking the bishop. On the other hand, castle, logical. But white gets the f-file. The f-file is very important here. What is white's plan here? Normally, it's to operate on the king side. And that's the point of bishop e3. There is an alternative plan, which is to play bishop d2, queen c1, and try to sacrifice on h6. But that is a little bit artificial, and black has a lot of ways to stop that. What else is there? I mean, white can play moves like h3, but rook e1 Tori has played, which I'm not a big... It's not a mistake, but I'm not a big fan of this move. Why? Because the rook belongs on the f-file, as I mentioned. Now the move bishop e3 is not going to be as effective. Now, the problem is the rook looks good here, but in fact it kind of stares at this pawn. So if the e-file were open, I'd look at this move differently, but as it stands... probably a little bit of an inaccuracy. Knight t4, interesting. So what is the idea? The e5 pawn is left hanging. But if knight takes e5, what I think Al Sheikh is preparing is d6, leading to very quick development of his pieces after knight back to f3 and bishop g4, pinning that knight. So Tori has to be very careful here. She has a decision on her hands. And Ping Spoofer, of course, black can remove the bishop to b6. He does not, that's a very good point, he does not have to take. Tori does play bishop b3, which I like a little bit more. It's a little safer than taking the pawn, so I like that decision. What is black going to do now? Probably d6. Now knight takes e5 is a threat. So you know, so I'm expecting d6 from black. Now black is in a bit of a pickle already, because if black plays d6, what can Tori then do? Tori can capture the knight with her bishop, ruining the pawn structure, which is why Al Sheikh takes the knight. Now the drawback of what he just did is that he's moved his knight 1, 2, 3 times and exchanged it for a knight that's only developed once. Now Tori puts her queen on a very nice square f3, where it in fact guards where it in fact controls the f file. Now let's see what Tori recaptures with. The correct way would be to capture with a pawn, as I previously mentioned. That leaves the f file open, and then she can relocate her rook to f1 and start pressuring the f file. But one of the things that's important to understand is Tori might be paying attention to the fact that if she takes on e3 with a pawn, that doubles her pawns. But it's important to make the judgment that that's less important now than opening the f file. So it would be much less accurate to take on e3 with another piece. If she takes with a rook, that kind of lets black off the hook. Black can then just complete his development with d6. The reason I muted Tori is because she's commentating on her end, on her stream. I'm commentating on her game here. I want to let her concentrate and find her own moves. After the game finishes, we will convene again and discuss the game. She decided to take with her queen, so that's one thing that we might discuss afterward. Is it's very important to understand that sometimes you do need to violate positional principles. That's a sacrifice you need to make for tactical reasons, oftentimes. Tori responds with a3, which again, not a mistake, but what exactly is the point of this move? She creates potentially a square for her bishop on a2, but it's a little bit too slow. I would have considered playing f4 instead, again trying to open the f file. Black responds with a6, potentially preparing a queenside expansion with b5. So it's a pretty quiet position. There's not much going on. White really has two ideas here. One is to play f4 as I like. The other is to prepare a central strike with d4. So we'll see which of these Tori ends up choosing. White can also play a neutral move like h3. Now, Tori is probably deciding on what plan. Now, this is a position where you need to decide what plan to choose, because there isn't enough naturally going on in the position to dictate a sequence of moves. And oftentimes when you're stuck and you don't know what plan to choose, as Tori plays a4, which is interesting, she stops b5, but I'm not sure b5 was something that necessarily needed stopping. At the same time, I like this move. But she has spent a tempo playing a3 and then a4. Maybe a4 immediately would have been a little bit more, would have carried a little more pizzazz, so to speak. But again, you might be like, well, she's made two moves with the same pawn. At the same time, the position is close, so, it doesn't exactly, moves don't exactly matter. Now, this is a very dangerous moment. Does anybody see what black is threatening here? Does anybody see what black is threatening? And I want to include you guys because that's the point of what we're doing here. Everybody is hopefully benefiting. What is black threatening? d5 followed by d4. d5, the bishop has to move, and d4 forks the queen and the knight. What does Tori have to do? She has to move one of the pieces that are going to be in the way. Either the bishop has to move to a2 or b3, or the queen has to move from e3. A good move here would be queen g3 or queen f3 especially, stopping d5 entirely. She could also move the knight, but it would be a little bit passive. I like the way the knight is placed on c3. She could also consider playing d4, blocking the pawn's passage to d4. Any one of these things prevents d5, but especially when you're only learning chess, it's very important to always start by asking yourself, what is my opponent's threat? And to consider not only one move threats, but 2 and 3 move threats. She misses it, which is a mistake. So rook d1 is a clear mistake. I think what Tori noticed was that none of her pieces are being attacked, so she proceeded with her idea, and black in fact plays d5, attacking the bishop. Now it's a major danger zone. The game is not over. Why is the game not over? Because although Tori will lose a piece here, she can get a couple of pawns for the piece she takes correctly. Now she has to take on e5. She has to come to terms with the fact that she's losing a piece. She can also play d4 here. That might actually allow her to save the piece, but that's a little bit complicated. d4, if e takes d4, then queen takes d4, pinning the queen. And if pawn takes c4, then pawn takes e5, opening up the attack on the queen and opening up the attack on the knight. So that might be a very strong move. She could also simply take on e5, getting 2 pawns for the piece and getting an initiative because the d file is open. So the game is far from over. This is it is only the beginning, as Count Dooku would say in Star Wars. And that is a very nerdy reference. Yes, I'm owning it. Yeah, I admit. And now, we all saw that, says Akila. Of course, of course. So Tori, by her thinking pattern and the fact that her hand has reached her face area, is signaling to me that she's realized that d4 is coming. Now it's very, very important. Early chess psychology. When you blunder, it's very easy to say. It's hard to do. You have to recuperate immediately. Assume that it's the start of a new game, and you have to find the lesser evil, and I think that's the key to making a lot of comebacks, which I obviously do because I'm usually in a lost position most of the time. It's very important to come to terms with the fact that you made a mistake, you blundered. Now what can I do given the situation that I have? And so let's see if Tori finds one of these options, either queen takes e5 or bishop takes d5 followed by queen takes d5. That would be worse. Can somebody explain to me conceptually why would bishop takes d5? What's up, Michael Scott? Saw the news. We'll get to that later. Why would it be worse to capture on d5 with the bishop than with the queen on e5? Could somebody explain to me conceptually? Dude, you'll play one game and you'll get to 2200. You need to make peace with it, but we'll talk about it. Because then you take with queen. Well, kind of, but oh man, and Tori has found d4. That is amazing. That is a serious move. I'm impressed. I am legitimately impressed, because let us again reiterate the idea. If e takes d4, then white can actually take with either piece, either queen takes d4 or rook takes d4, creating a pin against black's queen, which means that the bishop on c4 is untouchable. Now, black has another move, which is of course to take the bishop immediately. What does white do then? White captures on e5 with a pawn. Notice that opens up an attack on the queen and against the knight. You can follow along on your own board if you want. Now, that is not the end of the line, because after d takes c4, let me make that move on the board. D takes c4, d takes c5. Black can save the knight by playing knight d7, defending the queen and removing the knight from attack. But then white can advance the pawn to e6. She's got a huge initiative because black's pieces are very passive. That's what's important to understand about sacrificing. Sacrificing is very relative. If you have a huge initiative, you shouldn't be afraid to sacrifice pieces. So this is a fantastic move. And notice that Tori did exactly what she should have done. I just noticed that black does have the move knight g4 here, which could be quite nasty. That could be a problem, because that removes the knight preemptively from an attacked square, and it attacks the queen, forcing Tori to move her queen, and then black takes the bishop. But that's not the end, because there, that knight on g4 could later get into some trouble. Black ends up taking on c4 immediately. Now Tori's going to take on e5 with a pawn. Tori's going to take on e5 with a pawn, opening up the attack on the queen and the knight. Let's see if black finds knight d7. If he doesn't, then white is clearly better, because notice that all of white's pieces are positioned on open files on very nice squares. If white ends up taking the knight with a pawn, then Tori can then maneuver her knight around to d5 and to e7, or even to b6. Black is very underdeveloped. Black does find knight d7, which is not a tragedy. Now after e6, I like white's position, because all of her pieces are very harmoniously placed, but it's very important to act decisively here. If Tori kind of dilly-dallies with a move like queen d4, then that could allow black to consolidate. And as soon as black consolidates, that extra piece will make its presence felt. There are other moves here like queen d4, which would also be fine, even knight d5. So there's a lot of moves here that white can do to build up her initiative. But what would be an example of a bad move? Something like, I don't know, queen g3 or h3. The move that white makes now has to be very targeted toward developing the initiative. If she makes a move that, that is a little bit too slow, then this is a matter of one or two tempi. I wouldn't say that white is better. Objectively speaking, I would say that white is worse. If two computers were to play, I would bet that the valuation is probably 0.7, maybe -1 in black's favor. But notice -1 when you're down a piece is not a lot. And that is a mistake that a lot of beginners make, I think, is that, and not because they're dumb or something. I don't say this because, somebody is obtuse. It reminds me of Andy Dufresne and Norton in The Shawshank Redemption. But, people look at the computer's evaluation and they conclude the practical value of a move based on the computer's evaluation. But the computer's evaluation tells a very small part of the story. There are plenty of positions which the computer would even evaluate as winning, which I would still go for in a practical game, especially a blitz game where thinking time is confined and a human is sitting before you, not a computer. So you need to judge a position based on the difficulty of moves that one has to find. We do go over the game after. Shawshank Redemption, my favorite movie. One of my 3 or 4 favorite movies. I know that one by heart. Tori plays e6. Beautiful. She's playing very well, but she spent half of her time. It's only been 17 moves. She'll have to be a little bit careful. Black is forced to take on e6. The move rook e8 here would also be possible, but that's just very scary after he takes f7, forcing the king out. So Tori is playing extremely well right now, and let's see if she is rewarded. Now, what is the psychological effect of the way that she's playing? When one side has the initiative, the other side has to constantly be calculating, constantly be thinking. They burn a lot of time, they get fatigued, and that increases the chances of a blunder even if they successfully deal with the initiative at the start. Now, Al-Sheikh is playing very fast, so props to him. He's finding a sequence of good moves. Opinions on No Country for Old Men, a movie that I also greatly like. If the rule that led you here, if the rule you followed led you here, why follow the rule? That's, I think, the famous line. I don't know it exactly. But I love No Country for Old Men. I've seen it a couple of times. I can make an Anton Chigurh reference. Let me commentate the game like Anton Chigurh. Heads or tails? Heads or tails? This just saved your life. Decide now. Tell no one. My name is Anton Chigurh. I would like peanuts and fill up my gas. I'm invincible. No. What's up, Face Chess? This is Anton Chigurh commentating on GoldDustTori's game. Heads or tails, Face Chess. Now, white plays a queen e4 check, checking the king and attacking the c4 pawn. If the rule that you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule? So she checks on e4, perfectly sensible move. I would probably take on c4 immediately, leaving the king on h7. Why? Because the king on h7 can later be subject to the attack. There's a very famous Nimzovich quote. Could somebody tell me what it is that applies perfectly to this situation, where you hold off on a particular move? What is the cliche here that applies? Nobody. Anybody? Bueller. The threat is stronger than the execution. Perfect. Kasparov wannabe. So Tori has taken on c4. White is doing perfectly fine here. Now, you might be saying, again, she's down a piece. What am I even talking about? Am I like on drugs or something? No, because first of all, white has 2 pawns. She has 6 pawns. Black has 4. And all of white's pieces are very nicely placed. Rook's on an open file. Queen b6, very well played. Black is playing well above his rating as well. This is a very nice move because black is bringing the queen out of the pin and attacking the pawn on f2. Now Tori has a difficult situation to resolve. I would play and hits b2. I actually didn't notice that. Thank you for pointing that out, Extreme Dota. What would I do? I would play the move maybe knight e4 here. The idea being we're defending f2 and positioning, preparing to position the knight on d6. We have to play very fast here. These positions, when you're down a lot of material, you cannot care about pawns. You have to care about you have to have your eyes on the prize. So knight e4 would be my one candidate move. Another candidate move that I would consider is something along the lines of king h1, which could be calm, which looks slow, but in reality you stop queen takes f2 check. On the other hand, what is black's threat? Black wants to move his knight to f6, controlling the d5 score. It's very important to act fast. That is why I suggested knight e4 in the first place. Now, another idea which looks very brazen is to play knight d5, giving up the f2 pawn. Again, I'm sure the computer will refute this, so don't check the computer on this. This is a purely practical move. The idea of knight d5, if queen takes f2, king h1, you might be like, well, it's terrible to give up the f2 pawn with check. But if you think a little bit further, you might notice that after that, white threatens rook f1. So the opening of the f-file might actually be in white's favor. And of course, you get the knight to d5, from where it can later travel to e7, perhaps even to g6. So, you know, you have to, in your mind, be very disciplined about understanding what type of position do we have here. Is it a position where you can afford to play slowly, or is it a position where you have to play fast? So b3, which Tori played, is a very instructive mistake. What was her idea? She was looking at the b2 pawn and saying, well, let me defend it. First of all, black can take on f2, but I wouldn't be worried about that because, again, that opens the f-file in white's favor. I would be a lot more worried about a move like knight f6. The knight on f6 is going to fully restrict white's knight, and white's knight is going to be the sort of the screwdriver with which you're going to open up all the locks. All the weaknesses in black's position, they can only be accessed by white's knight, which is why this tempo is very important. So after knight f6, I think white is in a lot of trouble. While she still has 2 pawns for the piece, she no longer has that initiative that we were speaking about. Let's see what black can come up with here. By the way, guys, those of you just joining us, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. This is a collaborative training session with GoldDustTori, the one and only. Right now, I'm commentating on her game. After she finishes, we will reconvene and discuss it together, and then she will play another one. After that, we will transition to some opening studies. So black has taken on f2, which is a double-edged sword. As I mentioned, the f-file opens in white's favor. On the other hand, white only has one pawn for the piece. And we are squad streaming as well. Hope you're enjoying your meal. Flogzer, I don't think it matters. I think this affords white Tori a little bit more time to think, which is what we want. Now black has to be careful because rook f1 is the threat. Black has to play knight f6 here, I think, closing off the f-file. So in reality, I think queen takes f2 is fully justified if and only if black finds the move knight f6. So the game is far from over. Black does find the move knight f6. I think black is playing nearly perfectly in this game. So, you know, Tori has played very admirably, but credit to Al-Sheikh. He's found all the good defensive moves so far. Now the game is never over, and that's my mentality. Is white is down a piece. She maybe no longer has the initiative that she once did. But how do you make a comeback in chess? How do you come back from a completely lost position, which is a critical skill? Well, first of all, you have to borrow Magnus's quote: one move at a time. You cannot think, well, I'm going to win this game one day, because you can't imagine such a scenario. You're down a piece. That just depresses you further and makes you, you know, not more hopeful, but less hopeful. So you have to pose problems to your opponent. One problem after another problem after another problem. No matter how small these problems might seem, if you pose enough of them, your opponent gets tired. He might lose his guard. Now Tori plays knight e4, which is a very interesting move that I paid attention to earlier. What is the idea? Let's see if she can follow up correctly. After knight takes e4, she might be intending the move rook f1, pinning the queen and the rook, and the queen has no retreat in order to keep the rook guarded. There is a flaw with this, and we'll discuss the flaw if black does take on e4, but let's see what black does here. Alex Files, thank you so much for subscribing with Twitch Prime. I really appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying the content thus far. Thank you. Now let me ask a calculation question to you guys. And I would encourage you, if you have a board next to you, follow this on a real nice wooden board. This is, I think, the best way to learn. After knight takes e4, rook f1, where should the queen go? Black has a very strong tactical response in that position, and black does take on e4 with his knight. After rook f1, what is the correct move? Using the fact that the king is located on h1. Could somebody... Beautiful GM Amtsad. After rook f1, black has the move queen c5. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Queen takes c5, knight takes c5, and again the rook is hanging. But this is where the Italians have a word for this and the Germans have a word for this. What are both of these words? What is it that black does after white captures on c5? And Tori takes on e4 correctly, because rook f1, queen c5 would have been losing. Idk is not correct. Extreme Dota. Intermezzo is absolutely right. That's the Italian word for it. And Zwischenzug, very nice, is the German word for it. It's an in-between move. In-between moves, in my experience, are very hard tactics to see. A lot of people in the club player range, especially in the beginner range, struggle with intermediate moves, because at that point your brain, you know, it works more automatically. So it's very hard to alert yourself to the presence of an intermediate move. Bishop f5, another very good move. Black brings his bishop out. Now, leaving the b7 pawn hanging, but in return the c2 pawn is going to be hanging. These pawns are all on light squares. An anonymous gifter is gifting us up to Neighbor Boy. Thank you so much, Mr. Anonymous Gifter. Appreciate it. Black is playing beautifully and using his time exactly correctly. So, we need to be clear about the fact that Tori is giving this game her heart, but the initiative just didn't quite work out. Now let's see if she can put up a good resistance. How would I do that here? You have to take on b7, otherwise black's going to take on c2 for free, and she does. Now black has to take on c2 with his bishop. Now after rook c1, the problem is black has the move rook e8, and black just has too much horsepower. You know, it's like white is driving a Model T, black's driving like a I'm not good with cars, but some sort of like a Corvette. And that's the problem with extra material. Now, a piece of advice for you guys is basically when I was in my mother's womb, the classic advice you would get is when you're up material, you do what? What do you do when you're up material? The most cliched sentence of all time. And for some reason I said that in a New York accent, I don't know why. You just trade pieces and you get some coffee. So you trade pieces when you're up material, but what is that a movie reference? The Godfather, I guess. But I think that's, pardon my French, that's a load of malarkey. In my experience, sometimes you want to trade your pieces, but very often it is precisely because you're up material that an attack will work out better. And so you should attack when you're up material and you shouldn't trade pieces. That's a very limiting mentality. A lot of people get in a lot of trouble because as soon as they're up a knight or a bishop, they set it to be their life's goal to trade off all the rest of the pieces. And that way they allow blunders into their life. And very often, if you just set your mind on attacking, as black can do with the move rook b8, the point of that move is not to trade off the rooks, it's to prepare the move bishop e4, which will fork the queen in the g2 square. So my advice to you would be, and I'm a very concrete player, I like to think concretely on a case-by-case basis rather than in principles. Sometimes there is room for trades. Very often you want to be able to attack. You have an acting career waiting for you, says Z Fox. Who knows? It's entirely possible. I accept all invitations. If Woody Allen is in the chat, or even Woody Harrelson, or I'll even settle for Steven Spielberg, even though or God forbid Martin Scorsese. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. I'm on the phone. Leo DiCaprio, just a bunch of just amateur hour. I could do a much better job, but more about that later. Rook a8 played. I think black is playing on the level of a grandmaster. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Black is playing like a grandmaster. And Tori, what to do now? Tori has to resist with her final ounces of energy. How can she do that? Definitely taking on e8 is not the way, because after rook takes e8, black has two threats. Rook e1 threatening mate on the back rank, and bishop e4 forking the queen and the pawn on g2. White has to play the move rook g1. What is the purpose? The purpose is to guard the g2 pawn. Again, when you're completely lost, you don't resign, you don't give up hope. You got to create as many problems for your opponent as possible. So you gotta cling to the last ounces of hope, and there's just no other way psychologically to come back from completely lost situations. I agree, Stashku. Unfortunately, black's position basically plays itself. It's hard to make a mistake here. It's not the sort of situation where you can truly create problems. And rook g1, very nice. Tori is showing signs of a fighter, fighting with her last ounces of strength, and that's very important. It doesn't matter what your rating is. You got to put yourself in a psychological position where you can improve, and to do that you got to be used to being in lost positions and fighting. I think black is playing absolutely on the level of a grandmaster so far. What would I do here? I'd probably play rook e2, piling up on the g2 pawn. And this is what I mean when you're up material. This bishop, white doesn't have a counterpart, so this bishop belongs on e4. But playing bishop e4 immediately allows queen takes a6, and the pressure on g2 is not quite enough to force checkmate. However, if black positions a monster on e2 and then plays bishop e4, this pawn is going to be indefensible. So let's see if black is able to find the move rook e2 here. Boom pow pow. Boom pow pow. Subscribing with Twitch Prime. Thank you so much for the sub, my man. It means a lot to me. Love the support early on, guys. And maybe this guy's listening to me. Maybe he's on my stream. So, he does play bishop e4. Maybe I should suggest a queen blunder like queen f3, which might actually be a good move, unfortunately. That's the problem with this position. But maybe I should deliberately suggest a blunder of some sort. Now, he does play bishop e4. I'm not sure what he is intending after queen takes a6. So Tori just has to grab. The only way she can come back from this is she gains material. Oh, but unfortunately, black has... Okay, this is very interesting. After queen takes a6, it's very close to checkmate after the sacrifice on g2. But I'm calculating right now. I'm not seeing exactly the checkmate yet. Check king h7. I'm calculating a long line. But Centauri absolutely snaps on a6 quickly, very nicely done. Okay, now obviously black is completely winning still, and he can play a lot of moves. He can play rook f6, intending to carry the rook over to g6 and pile up on g2. What else can he do? He can probably take on g2. I would bet you he does take on g2. Now I don't see it yet because rook takes g2. Rook e1 check, rook takes e1, queen takes e1. Follow along, guys. Rook g1, queen e4 check, rook g2. Now, why is rook f1 not checkmate in that position? Can somebody tell me? Could somebody tell me why in the end of that line rook f1 is not checkmate? Because, and you got to look at the whole board. And he goes for this. Let's see if he sees it. Because the queen is on a6, guarding the pawn on f1, guarding the square on f1. A huge source of blunders, and I'm not saying this to dumb it down. I blundered for this reason, is precisely because you don't look at the entire board. Your brain kind of sections things off flank by flank. But I do see a win here. I can't believe Black has found this so fast. He's found it faster than I have. After rook takes c1, queen takes c1, rook g1, queen e4, rook g2, Black does have a win, I believe. And what is that win? He has not blundered. This is actually correct. What is the win? Mr. Davis, good to see you. Now, queen b1, I'll guard with the rook g1, so that doesn't quite do the trick. But rook f2, says the Duke of Bruins and Solidarity. That's very nice. Rook f2. Attacking g2, there's no way to defend g2. Now, I thought originally that white has perpetual, but after queen c8, king h7, white runs out of checks. If white guards the rook then with queen h3, this is a long line, guys. Practice your visualization. What does Black then do? What does Black do after that? No, I don't think he's watching the stream because, no, this guy, I hate to sour the atmosphere, guys, but this guy's played an absolutely flawless game of chess. This guy has played a flawless game of chess. Then rook f1 checkmate. Because, now it's very important to realize this, small differences in the position. When you're calculating a long line, one of the biggest sources of mistakes is when you assume that certain properties of the position are the same as they always were. But that is not often. Now rook f1 is checkmate. Let's test if this guy is actually watching the stream. Rook f1 mate, and the game is over. Rook f1 is checkmate. Rook f1 mate. Alright, good game. And I have a story about that. My friend was telling me about this, how she many years ago she had a game where her opponent actually delivered, not Tori but somebody I know, her opponent delivered mate and said checkmate, and it was actually a blunder of this exact sort. Rook f2 played, very nice. Queen c8 check. Now white has to stay in the game with queen c8 and queen g4, but unfortunately there's just no way to stay above checkmate. And yeah, it takes forever to see a mate. And one rook f2. I don't know what to tell you guys, but Mr. Al-Sheikh has played on the level of a super GM in this game. So, you know. But, queen c8 check. Tori, hats off to her. She's not losing hope, fighting until the last drop of blood. Unfortunately, if there was a bishop, say, on a6, then white would be winning. So she's really suffered because there's nothing to guard the light squares other than the queen. Yeah, other than the queen, there's nothing to guard the light square. This guy has won every game he's played, I'd say, basically. And, you know, that's interesting enough. Interesting enough. One moment. I'm going to, he might be underrated. I'm not someone to throw out accusations, and it might very well be that this guy is simply underrated, but I'm going to ask the right authority to conduct a small investigation. I'm going to ask the right authority to ask us to conduct an investigation. Hello. And let's see, Tori will unmute herself in moments.
Oh wait, hi. That was stressful.
Well, I will tell you this. My estimation of your opponent's strength is probably GM level.
Yeah, that's what my chat was saying. That they're playing moves that you were saying.
Now, what that implies, I will not say, and I'm not implying anything myself. But you know, So yeah, the level of his play, yeah, he was listening to me. Now it's funny because at the very end on move 32, and shall we make an analysis board to look over this game? Or we can both look at our own boards and follow along. Or so, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know what's best.
My
so.
chat is reporting 99.5% accuracy. Naturally, I do that every time. Actually, that's pretty low. What do you say? So that's
It's casual.
I could do that in my sleep. Casually, 99.5%. Yeah, I remember. Aquila says I remember being 99.5% at 1300. So Tori, you'll become a serious chess player when you do 99.6% accuracy. This is not serious.
Awesome.
I'm kidding, of course. So let's do. Let me think. If I click on your game, will you be able to? Actually, let me open an analysis board.
That's
and
very easy.
I'll invite you, and then we can reconstruct the game maybe.
Okay.
So we do that through live chess, and then you click. Let me see. Where is that feature that you pointed out to create an analysis? Live analysis.
If you go to play and then click the board.
Oh, perfect. It actually that game actually shows up. Now let me invite you.
Okay.
1 moment. Clear board. Set position. Where is the invite feature? I remember having it last time.
You think so, Shane? They said that was one of my best games.
That was you played your heart out, and I say that honestly. So let's see. Plus invites. There we go. GoldDustTori.
Okay.
Perfect. Do you see the board?
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think Tori, you found every chance that you had to complicate the position. You found it, literally every one. So,
thanks.
So the opening. So bishop c5, to my knowledge. So you play the 4 knights. Obviously, knight f6 is the main move here. And I suppose you were intending bishop c4. This could have transposed into the game. This did transpose into the game actually. But bishop c5 is a little bit non-standard, and what you can do here is you can actually take on e5.
Yeah, I was talking about that on stream. I've never actually remembered to do this ever in an actual game, but people have done this to me before.
Yeah, it's an annoying little idea because knight takes e5, d4, and the point is not so much that you win a pawn. You don't win a pawn. Black has a million ways to recover the pawn. The point is that you develop and you control the center before your opponent. So bishop d6 is standard here.
Okay.
Sorry, preparing to capture with a bishop. But now black has this awkward bishop on e5. He hasn't developed his king side, and you have a million moves here. You can just develop a bishop d3. You can even chase the bishop with f4 and control more of the center. So I think white has a bit of an initiative here. Yeah, and my chat is confirming 99.5%.
Yeah.
So I've alerted Mr. FBI chairman and CIA director, to take time out of their days.
Thanks, Johnny DJ.
Yeah,
Okay.
the local private investigators are on it. They're all on the case. They're unearthing the necessary photos. But so you play bishop c4, which is fine, transposes, and you got this kind of position, castles. This is all logical. I think this is kind of the first instructive moment that I'd like to draw your attention to.
Okay.
You play the move rook e1, and I think it's very important when you get into a position that you're not exactly, unless it's theory, then you begin thinking concretely. And the question here is kind of how are you going to put your pieces? How are you going to develop? And the move that occurred to me is the move bishop e3. And the idea of this is that if bishop takes a3, f takes a3, on the one hand your pawns are doubled, right? But can you tell me what you get in return? What is the benefit of doing this from a tactical perspective?
Well, you get the F file.
Precisely. You get the F file. Your bishop is already perfectly positioned on c4 where it's extracting the king. And you have a million maneuvers here to get this attack rolling while black is busy getting out of bed with d6.
Yeah.
You can play knight h4, knight g6 even because of the pin. So this would be kind of a more combative move, I think. The problem with rook e1 is if there was no pawn on e4, this would be a perfectly sensible move. But as it stands, while the rook kind of looks good, it's kind of staring at your own pawn.
Yeah.
So I felt like this was a little bit too slow. He played knight t4, which is actually a very advanced move. Did you see the possibility of taking on e5?
Yeah. Usually what happens in this kind of stuff is that I get really unsure about myself, and I'm getting a lot better at calculating, but I still struggle with it.
What were your considerations here?
Well, I think I did bishop to e3, I think is what I actually did. But I did think about taking the pawn because I'm like, ooh, free pawn. But then I always wonder, is it actually a free pawn?
Well, it was not in this case. My chat is reporting that you play 92.6% accuracy. That is amazing. That would have probably beaten like a combination of Faruja, Magnus, and Kasparov. But this guy, this guy was wearing like 4 bulletproof vests. So the problem with this was d6, and you have the right mentality of what happens if of not trusting the fact that you can make a move that just looks too good to be true, because often your opponent has something under his sleeve. But you also kind of have to balance that with being able to call someone's bluff. And that, I think, comes with experience and kind of tactical exercises. Now, the problem here is that your knight is attacked. You can take on f7, and this, but this isn't great because he's got 2 nice pieces for a rook. And the problem is if you move your knight back to f3, then he has the nasty move, bishop g4, pinning your knight, and he's got a huge attack for the pawn.
Yeah.
And so... this would be unpleasant. So your decision was absolutely correct. Then you took on e3 with a queen. I thought that maybe taking with the pawn was a little bit more sensible, opening up the f file again. You have less.
I've never really taken with like pawn. Like I don't know why. I think I had somebody, maybe it was my chat or something, like a long time ago, told me to like basically not touch the pawns in front of my king pretty much, because I did it for a while, but it always got me in trouble. So now I've never thought about taking with that pawn.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that's correct if you're thinking of moves like g4. But you got to reason on a case-by-case basis. Is my king in real danger if I move my pawn? And here, it is true that f2 is now an empty square, but black has not exactly masked his pieces on the king side.
Yeah.
There's not exactly like military plans here. If there was a knight on g4 and a queen on h4, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. But I think in these cases, you want to think on a case-by-case basis. My chat is asking, in the previous position, had you taken the pawn and played knight g6, which would be an interesting move. I think the reason here is still bishop g4, and there's still a big initiative after queen d2, rook e8. This knight is actually quite awkward. So I think this still would have been bad for you. I think that's the response that I have. So you took with the queen, which is fine. And the critical moment in the game, a3, a4, was fine stopping b5. The critical moment was really here. Did you miss the move d5?
I thought about it, but what did I play? Did I just move?
You played rook a d1.
Rook. Oh, well, okay. I saw that was coming, but I didn't see what the actual intent of it was, which is where I was like, oh no, I'm gonna lose like a piece or something. Yeah. But that was like 2 moves after this happened.
This was a very sneaky move.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
But I never like actually like that's never happened to me before, so I was like, oh. Yeah.
I mean, rook d1, in the absence of tactics, had your bishop been maybe on a2, this would be a great move, because one plan that I had my eye on was to open up the center with d4. Yeah. And notice that like black is a little bit cramped, so when your opponent is a little cramped and your pieces are a little bit more free, I think it's a great idea to open up the center. And you could have done that, I think, immediately with a move d4. Maybe this would have been a little bit better, stopping the pawn's progression. So, in terms of these sneaky moves, I think you're doing a great job of checking for one move threats, which there aren't in this position. But whenever your pieces are kind of masked in the center, that's a precursor to a lot of forks and double attacks, and you got to watch out for those, especially if the queen and the knight are placed on a forkable square. You got to envision the worst scenarios. Take on the Russian pessimism and be like, what is the worst thing that could happen? In your nightmares, you're going to see a pawn on d4, and then you got to kind of look at the present position and be like, well, could this actually happen?
Yeah.
So after rook a d1, I thought you reacted brilliantly here with a move d4, which we were hoping you would play, and you did. It's a very impressive defensive resource.
Thanks.
And after e takes d4, queen takes d4, the point is the queen is pinned. So he found this response, which is by no means trivial. And then you followed up correctly with e6. So when you're down material, you want to open as many files as possible. You have to get the initiative. And, at the rest of the game, I just think he played perfect moves. So I was saying on my stream that I think objectively black is much better here if he's able to play perfectly. Yeah. Which is a tall order for any human being, but not for Mr. Al-Sheikh 4, who did that. I think that maybe your final chance, so to speak, would have been to take the pawn immediately. And
I didn't even see that.
You did take the pawn after queen e4. Now the point here is the king on h7. When you're comparing the king on h7 and the king on h8, what can you tell me about where the king is better placed from a long-term point of view.
I mean, I think h8 would have been a better spot for the king.
Right. And why would that be?
Because I can't check it.
Precisely. So
yeah.
when you're thinking about complicated chess positions, there's almost two modes of thinking. There's the concrete mode, which is what is he threatening? What is my immediate plan? And then there's the long-term thinking of, in the distant future, in like 2026, when Earth is blasted by a meteor, what will I be doing then? And in that case, you can imagine a million scenarios, as you pointed out, where you're checking the king, and that could be very useful. I'm seeing something where potentially you could even deliver some sort of a fork. Not here, because there's bishop f5, but it's very important to think about, that's what I call tactical awareness, about what could happen in the future. And that way you see a lot more tactics than if you kind of look only the immediacy.
Yeah.
And after you gave a check, his king is relatively safe. Queen b6 was a brilliant move, attacking both pawns. I thought maybe you could have put the knight on d5, trying to somehow muddy the waters, but none of this would have really worked, because something like knight f6, he trades off your knight. It's just not enough horsepower here. You played b3, and after this, I think the rest of the game he conducted flawlessly, including this final combination, which was incredibly impressive. I didn't see this at first. I thought that he would play... I thought that bishop e4 was a mistake, but then we all realized together that he had the sequence. And it's important that rook f1 is a mate here, because queen guards the square, but he found rook f2, and unfortunately for you, there just wasn't any checks after queen c8, king h7.
Yeah, I started getting low on time around this point, and then and then I was like, I don't really know how to even recover.
Yeah, and you were playing, like a mixture of God and like Superman. But I think that what are the lessons from this game? I think the critical moment, and I think that's how you want to analyze your games, is what was the critical moment? The critical moment was definitely here.
Yeah.
And what you can do is do more of the long-term thinking. Even though you don't see a one-move threat, which there isn't, you got to be kind of a pessimist at the chessboard and always ask yourself, well, what could go wrong in the long term?
Yeah.
And if I had my worst nightmare, maybe the pawn would land on t4, and you're like, wait a minute, that's pretty close to happening. And what could you have done here? Maybe move the queen to f3, guarding the d5 square, and removing the queen from a forkable square.
Oh, yeah.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
And someone is saying maybe that's Penguin, Andrew Tang, and he's sandbagging, but even for a GM, this level of play would be a tall order. And after that, I think you reacted brilliantly, with the only exception that maybe queen takes c4 immediately would have yielded more practical chances.
Yeah.
Other than that, I thought it was a nice and clean game. And the one last thing I'll say is, remember, when you're talking about general chess principles, try to think on a case-by-case basis. Think about the concrete situation. Does bishop e3 weaken my king, even though I move my pawn away from the king side? In this specific case, the answer is no. Even though in another situation, if black had more pieces on the king side, maybe the answer would have been yes.
Okay.
So I think those are the takeaways. Are you down to play one more game, or would you like to switch to something else? What do you think, Tori?
Yeah, I could play another game.
That sounds great, and we'll do the same thing. Maybe you'll be black this time.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll do the same drill.
Okay.
Hopefully you'll play someone who's from planet Earth.
Hopefully.